Thank you all, thanks. Hello everyone. Thanks for coming and drinking. It's nice. What we got here? We have NYU over here? Yeah. NYU in the house? Nice. We have students. All right. Well, so, these are confusing times, if you haven't noticed. And truly, one of the few things that actually still makes sense to me in this day and age is art. Even with all the injustice, all the infuriating contradictions, and just the sheer despair, somehow art can bring all of those to order. Even if it's just for that 1 or 2 hours on a stage, in the hands of the artist, somehow it all makes sense. And tonight, we're going to have a discussion about that, about both the possibilities of art, but also about who gets the platform. Because art really is a perspective, is it not? A play, a painting, a poem, it is a perspective. So the question is, whose perspective gets elevated? We are living at an incredible moment when art and politics are increasingly colliding. I think it's exciting. It's disorienting, trying to make sense of that. And so we're very lucky that we have some people who are really at the top of their game in the theater world to come and help us make sense of that. 3 directors, Garry Hynes, Leah C. Gardiner, and Tamilla Woodard. They're all going to be joining us to help us make sense, not just of what they do as directors in the theater world, but also what it means to be a woman of color, who gets to control what happens on stage and to decide who gets to be on stage. These are huge decisions. They have huge consequences for how we see the world around us and the world that we should be bringing into being. So we're very excited to have them. Before that happens, we are going to be having an excerpt from an upcoming musical. It's called Dust and Shadow. And we're going to have a conversation with the director of that. Her name is Rachel Flynn. And right now, I'd like to bring up a colleague, Jennifer Vanasco, because I think we really need to ask ourselves, what exactly is changing in the realm of theater? And what isn't changing? And Jay's really been thinking through these questions a lot. So please give a big hand to Jennifer Vanasco.
Hey, Jay. Hey, Arun. Hey, everyone.
So, Jay, I want to go back a few months ago because it was just one of those casual, impromptu kind of conversations. You brought me over to your desk and you said that you had just seen Hadestown. And you were clearly very excited about it, and you maybe listened to one of the songs, and you got me excited about it, and I went and saw it, and it was amazing. And
I think I got everybody at WNYC to see that show.
You need some sort of commission, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think so.
So, in some ways, tonight is happening partly because of the conversation you started a few months ago. So I do thank you for that. I think it's worth, just for the sake of people who've either seen Hadestown or not, just to hear a little snippet of that. So we're going to hear a song right now for just a second, and then we'll talk.
So King Hades agreed that for half of each year she would stay with him there in his world down below. But the other half, she could walk in the sun, and the sun in turn burned twice as bright, which is where the seasons come from, and with them the cycle of the seed and the sickle, and the lives of the people and the birds in their flight,
singing.
So that was Reeve Carney singing the part
Hades.
Orpheus.
Sorry,
Sorry.
Orpheus, yeah.
And Andre de Shields. And of all the songs I could have played, there's a reason from Hadestown. There's a reason I picked this particular one, because it speaks to an ongoing question that you and I have been chatting about, which is, what does it mean to have more women running theater? Because this show was it's by Anais Mitchell. It's something that she took many years to kind of bring to Broadway. It's won a whole bunch of Tonys. Have any of you guys seen Hadestown? Woo! A few woos, a few quiet hands up in the air. Okay, several of you have seen it. It has made, I guess, a bit of a splash, not just artistically, but also because of the conversations around it. But this song, I want to kind of speak about it for a second, because you and I have talked about this, but why? In what way do you think this song and sort of speaks to this larger question about the impact on theater when women run the show?
So the really interesting thing about this is that usually in musicals, men are at like the nice, comfortable kind of midpoint in their range, and they can sing everything really beautifully and strongly. And women are often pushed to like the really high part of their range or really low part of their range. And in Hadestown, that actually happens with the men. And it's the kind of thing that you don't even realize until you hear it happening, that like, oh, Reef Carney he's mostly singing, he's often singing in falsetto. And Patrick Page as Hades is like all the way down here all the time. And of course, in some ways, I think it shows the way that women can kind of expand things for everyone, or people who are not normally on stage or behind the scenes, they can expand things for everyone, right? Because it's like yes, women get to have like very, very powerful voices in this, but also the men get to play around with singing songs up and singing them low, and that's just more interesting, right? It's like interesting to do new things.
I actually had a colleague who didn't realize that when she heard a bit of this, that this was a man singing.
Yeah, I mean, he does a great job up there.
Yeah, and it's actually, as you mentioned, like it's female characters who primarily have the agency in this particular play, in this musical rather.
Right, because the thing that, for those of you who haven't seen or don't know about Hadestown, it's the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. And we've all heard of Orpheus, or I feel like most of us have heard of Orpheus. I think I had the Greek myths in 4th grade or something. And so, you have Orpheus and his lyre, and poor Orpheus, he like goes to get Eurydice, and then she follows him, and he's not supposed to look back or she's gonna disappear, and he doesn't look back, and then he looks back, and she's gone. Very tragic. That is always about Orpheus. I didn't even, until I saw Hadestown, if you quizzed me on the street, I would have said Orpheus and Agnes, Mary,
Ethel.
There's just nothing. But so what this show does is it really centers the women. So this story is about Eurydice, and she's the one who has agency. She's the one who decides. We feel great empathy for her. And Orpheus is kind of, most of the critics said Orpheus was underwritten, which he was, and a lot of people saw that as a bad thing. Part of me was like, all right, great. It's nice when that happens to somebody who's not female. And
Hadestown was not only written by a woman, Anais Mitchell, it was also directed by one, Rachel Chavkin, and she made a very bold and well-received speech after winning the Best Director award at the Tonys. Let's take a look at what she said.
My folks raised me with the understanding that life is a team sport, and so is walking out of hell. That's what is at the heart of the show. It's about whether you can keep faith when you are made to feel alone, and it reminds us that that is how power structures try to maintain control, by making you feel like you're walking alone in the darkness, even when your partner is right there at your back. And this is why I wish I wasn't the only woman directing a musical on Broadway this season. There are so many women who are ready to go. There are so many artists of color who are ready to go. And we need to see that racial diversity and gender diversity reflected in our critical establishment too. This is not a pipeline issue. It is a failure of imagination by a field whose job is to imagine the way the world could be. So let's do it. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so in that, she says two things that are very interesting. The first was that she was the only one directing a musical that year, last season, right? So not only was she the only one directing a musical last season, but in the past 73 years of Tonys, there have only been 10 women who've won the Tony Award for Best Direction. 10. 4 of those are for musicals. And musicals are really like the money thing, right? There's one woman director who said, like, the closer you get to the money, the fewer women you have. And I think that's really the problem. So the other thing she says is pipeline. And she's 100% right. There isn't a pipeline issue. So Broadway this season is actually doing better this season than it has previously. But about 1/3 of the shows opening this season, roughly, more or less, are women directors. But off-Broadway and off-Broadway, the numbers are way better. They've been closer to like 40 to 47% this past year. So the women are there, they just don't always make it to the upper echelons. They kind of get stuck in the off-Broadway milieu, which is not terrible. Often the best, honestly, the best theater is often off-Broadway.
But let's just pick that apart.
Yeah,
What is stuck? I mean, these roadblocks that are not just sitting there, they are created. Do you have any sense of, when we hear from people in the industry, the nature of those roadblocks?
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of things. I think first of all, like theater, like many industries, is really done by who you know. It's like a handshake industry, right? So people have to be, the producers are spending, especially in commercial theater, producers are spending an insane amount of money, millions and millions of dollars to get shows up on Broadway. And they want to know that they're putting in the hands of a person who they can trust, who they think is reliable and dependable. And often that person looks just like them. And the majority of Broadway producers are white men, so that's one issue. And then also there's the if you're a woman, you know, you always, and this is true across the board, of course, you always have to walk the line between like, either you can fall off to one side and people think that you're a mess and don't have everything together and you're too emotional and weak, or you can fall off on the other side. And on that side, you're just really unpleasant to work for. So then, you know, women have to like be, in addition to like being really good directors, they kind of have to be like social geniuses. So there's that additional thing. And then the cost of failure is really high. For women, you get your shot to do a show on Broadway, and if you win the Tony, then good for you, because you'll be able to do it again.
At the very least, you can win a Tony. Come on.
I mean, come on. But if it doesn't go well, then that might be it. Not just for you, but maybe for a lot of other women that season. Like it tarnishes everyone. And so because of that, there's this real sense of scarcity.
And by scarcity, you're talking about the whole thing of like, they're competing against each other to some extent.
Right. I think that by and large, like our current coterie of like directors off Broadway are like try to overcome that, but there is kind of the feeling that like, oh, like one woman maybe gets a shot, or like one person of color gets a shot, and so you have to like fight really, really, really hard to be that one person. So that's a lot, and all this takes so much energy. It's so much energy, right? And like all that energy could go into the work. But instead of going into the work, that energy is going into like trying to convince people that like, no, okay, I might be female or I might be Latina, but like you can still depend on me. I will still show up for rehearsal on time.
Jay, you saw, I mean, I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the recent work you've seen. You and I both seen recently, we both got to see Four Colored Girls, whose director, Leah C. Gardiner, is here tonight. What do you think when you see a show like that, you take away from, in terms of this issue of the impact of a woman director on a performance?
So, whether the fact that a director is a woman is significant, how people feel about that, it kind of falls into two camps. The first camp, which I gotta say that I was in for a really long time, meaning up until 3 weeks ago, is that, it doesn't matter if she's a woman camp as long as she's good. We never talk about men directors and how does being male influences guys' work. We just never do that. We just talk about the directors and if it's good and if they use the space well and what was their vision. So I kind of thought we should talk about women that way too. Women are women, they're people. How they direct a show is very individual based on where they come from and the kind of work they like and who they are. But my sister critic said, whoa, no. You were totally wrong. So what they said is actually that somebody is a woman. So it's not just that women should have equal opportunity because they should, because it's fair, but also because women, when women are directors, then like any director, they connect to work that's resonant for them. And so if somebody is a woman or a person of color, then they're connecting to all these untold or undertold stories that we might not see very much on our stages. So that work comes then to Broadway or off-Broadway or off-Broadway. And then, as we talked about with Hadestown, also, this kind of work can also center women's experiences. I gotta say too, there's a show I saw recently that was directed by a man, and there was this one scene. It was a good show. I'm not gonna say what it is but there's this.
Is it a good show?
No, because I don't want to be mean about this one scene. But there's this one scene in it where there is a young man, and he is talking to an older woman, and he spits on the floor, and she's kind of like, that's cool, and invites him over for dinner. No, in a million, this would not that's such profound disrespect. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is the kind of disrespect women deal with every day. There's no way that this would just kind of roll over. She would recognize right away that it was disrespectful. So there's that. There's things like that sometimes are not right if they're not done by women. But then also, actors, for good performances, actors really need to be vulnerable. And women are, so this is stereotypy, I don't want this to be say this in the wrong way, but women have traditionally been known to be nurturing. And I was just talking backstage with one of the directors who said, in order is actually Leah Gardiner. So we're talking about For Colored Girls, because in For Colored Girls, the thing that is most incredible, it's a very, very good show, but the thing that's most incredible about it is that all these women on stage are telling all these different stories, and yet the way she directs it, it's they're all one family. You can see them supporting each other. There's a sense of intimacy. They might touch somebody else's shoulder as they walk by as she's telling her story, or they might just smile at her, or wink at her, or just wave at her from a corner, or vocally acknowledge her. And that it feels so much like what it's like to be in a supportive group of women. It feels just like that, all the touching. And so Leah said that she didn't have a lot of time to get that cast to feel like that. And she said what she did is she was honest first. That when they talked about these issues, she told the actors about her own struggles and encouraged them to share that. And by doing that, they really bonded. And I feel that, of course, could happen. There were really sensitive male directors, and that could absolutely happen in that context. But it does feel like women, if there's one place where women have the edge, it's things like that.
Jay, thanks so much. Jennifer Vanasco, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
WNYC's theater director. Theater critic. You can hear her on WNYC, or you can read her online at wnyc.org. And now what I'd like to do is welcome to the stage LaToya Edwards and pianist Emily Cohn. They're going to perform an excerpt from Dust and Shadow, which was adapted from a book that revolves around Jack the Ripper and Sherlock Holmes, as well as the women who are directly impacted by that reign of terror in 19th century London. LaToya and Emily, all yours.
Tell me, Dr. Watson, shall I run and hide? I'm just a silly creature who needs to step aside. Leave the business to the men and I'll be in their debt. While it's a lovely offer, there's one thing you forget. It's men who keep on living while we face the blade. You're playing with your puzzle, unaffected, unafraid. Excuse me my impatience, but I won't stand by while everyone around me is left out there to die. These are my friends, and friends can't be bought. We watch out for each other, 'cause we are all we've got. You may think I'm something special, that I've lost my way. My life would be so different were I not led astray. You're avoiding all the facts, love. Stop telling yourself such lies. I'm a whore like all the others, no princess in disguise. These are my friends, they're all I hold dear. I won't leave them stranded, and I won't live in fear. We don't always ask for the friends that we make, but when a bond is made, it's a bond you don't break. Now you of all men should be able to see what Holmes means to you. These women mean to me. We were women when this started, and we're women still. No man has stripped that from us, and no man ever will. No man ever will. No man ever
LaToya Edwards and Emily Cohn, thank you so much. All right, now let's welcome the director of Dust and Shadow, Rachel Flynn. Thanks so much for joining us here.
You sound great.
You did. So, where do things stand right now? You're in development on this musical.
We are, yeah. It's a piece that was adapted from a novel by an extraordinary novelist, Lindsay Fay. And she wrote this Sherlockian pastiche, and that's what she's sort of known for. She wrote this Jane Eyre pastiche a few years ago, and she's a Baker Street regular. She knows her Sherlock, and she officially, that's not a clever term. She's a Baker Street regular, and she lectures on Sherlock.
Wait, that actually means something?
That means something. She goes to Sherlock conventions and talks to people about, I don't know who goes, but she goes and she speaks about Arthur Conan Doyle and about Sherlock in particular.
I mean, that's the thing, is like we're well acquainted with these tales of great men,
yes,
right? Sherlock and Jack the Ripper, even if he is sort of a mystery, he's also the women, on the other hand, who are the center of these stories. We don't really know a whole lot about them, do we?
No, they're literally voiceless. The most famous woman in the Sherlock stories is known as the Woman. That's it. That's the whole thing. And for Jack the Ripper, who, while he was a historical figure, one we don't know very much about, and exists in myth and fiction in many ways just as much as Sherlock and Watson, there are sort of macabre websites about these women and their histories, but there's a lot we don't know about them. We know so much more about the theories of Jack the Ripper and who he could be, and was he the crown prince, or was he a butcher, or was he this? And the women themselves, in looking at this story, many of the victims were in their 40s and 50s, 30s to 50s. And while they were sex workers, many of them were, I don't know quite how to say it, but essentially moonlighting, as there was sex work to bring in additional money to their families. These were some of them married women and shop owners and proprietors. And so it existed at this nexus of a place where women had a lot of power in Victorian London, but also not very much of a representation or a voice in what they were doing.
But even if we look at more recent depictions of sex workers in popular culture, you still see them in the credits as hooker number 1 and number 2.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Really not that much has changed for the most part since mid-19th century London when it comes to how we treat these narratives.
And when we talk about theater in particular, well, theater in general and musical theater in particular, sometimes we get to this space where I think the women get to serve as valuable lessons for the men. In comic books, it's called fridging the women, and we have this question mark of how the women function in this story, and how much we learn about them, and how much they're providing an impetus to. We get these Sherlock stories and these Victorian musicals that are grand and sort of silly, and they're capers and mystery, and we lose the horror of these events in mystery stories sometimes, and frequently the people that we leave out of those stories to make them sort of fun and exciting and feel like capers are the victims, very frequently the women.
And presumably the reason that they are nameless and voiceless is because the authorities at that time also were fairly indifferent to what was happening.
Absolutely, yeah. There was a tremendous amount of shame involved in this case. And so we thought, I think Lindsay had this brilliant idea to have Sherlock and Watson, who for the most part investigated a lot of fun things. There was like a mysterious dog that turned out to be not a dog, right? I mean, that's the kind of, those are Sherlock stories, the Hound of the Baskervilles, and things like that. And while there are murders, that's not the point. The point is unlocking the puzzle and finding all the clues and following the clues, with this very real story where these women very much are, these are historical figures, and what it means to think you're solving a puzzle, but actually you're being faced with the realities of if you don't succeed, if you don't catch the killer.
What attracted you to the script in the first place?
I love that aspect of it. I love this particular song happens in Act 2, and we meet Miss Marianne Monk, who herself is a friend of a lot of the victims and a sex worker, and she is also an incredibly good detective. And she meets Sherlock and Watson at the first crime scene, and she starts cracking the code as much as everybody else on the team. And in the middle of trying to track down Jack the Ripper, they think they have a lead, and they're about to go and get Scotland Yard out into the streets, and the head of Scotland Yard says, should we let the ladies of the night know that he's going to be here tonight? And Sherlock says no. And Watson says, what are you talking about? And Sherlock in the book and in our book says, snares require bait. Right. And,
collateral damage.
Yes, collateral damage. And for Sherlock, who's descending into madness in our joyful musical about Jack the Ripper, is in pursuit of a mystery. He's in pursuit of, if you're familiar with the Sherlock books, his Moriarty, his ultimate villain. But these are quite literally her friends. They are real people. They have backstories. And so she, horrified, sings this song to try to remind them of the humanity of these people. They don't listen, and she runs out to warn them.
What is the hardest challenge about putting the show together?
It's a big musical. And that costs a lot of money. And my background is in musical theater performance. I've been doing that here, and I've been very lucky to do that here for a decade now. And I got tired of not being able to do anything in the room but sing and say the lines. And as thrilling as it's been to be a part of this community, I'm not necessarily a name that a lot of folks have heard of. I've been so thrilled about developing this piece. And these writers, too, they're phenomenal writers, Dustin Sullivan, Casey Marino, and Jonathan Reed-Gelt, and they're out of the BMI program, and they're fantastic. And I'm biased, but I think it's a wonderful script and score. And that's not enough to get you $15 million.
A mere $15 million?
Just a simple, if anyone brought it tonight, please find me after the show. But I was incredible. The best thing about tonight, getting to listen to you sing is a joy, and speaking with you. And also I've been able to sit in this green room and listen to this panel of people talk about theater all night. It's grad school. And one of the things that's been brought up is this idea that it's people hire who they're comfortable with, and who they're comfortable with, as Jennifer said earlier, ends up looking a lot like them. It ends up looking a lot like the producers.
Yeah.
I don't look like a lot of the producers, and a lot of us don't, who are bringing big budget musicals to Broadway right now. So I think the biggest challenge for us right now, we've got all of the typical development, trying to get the script tight and make sure that we know what it looks like and how it moves and orchestrations, but also getting somebody to trust us with that amount of money and those resources. It's hard to find a home for it.
So is it too early to say when we might be able to see this?
Again, if anyone brought $15 million tonight, then next week, I don't know.
TBD with the date.
TBD.
Got
We're
it.
looking for a home for the piece right now. We've been very lucky to find a group of producers who believe in the piece, so we're moving forward, but who knows where yet.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Everyone, please give Rachel Flynn a big hand. And good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. All right, folks, so once again, that is Dust and Shadow. So please keep an eye out, and hopefully we'll be seeing it on the stage, sure enough. All right, now it's time to bring up our celebrity panelists. So everyone, please welcome Garry Hynes, Leah C. Gardiner, and Tamilla Woodard. All right. Thank y'all.
I've got assistance. Thank you.
All right. All right. Let's go ahead and tell you a little bit how who we have up here tonight. Starting with my far right, Garry Hynes, the first woman to win a Tony Award for directing a play for the Beauty Queen of Leenane in 1998. In 1975, she co-founded The Druid and has been its artistic director for much of that time, and she's got a big show that's about to open in how many days?
I'm not thinking about it. I think
I'm sorry to rudely
Friday.
awaken you. Friday.
Thursday, Friday.
That'll be Richard III, folks.
Yeah.
Direct Shakespeare, right?
Yes.
That
Think so.
guy. Let's take a quick look at what's about to open. Richard III. All right, seated next to her, Leah C. Gardiner is an Obie Award-winning stage and film director known for the incisive clarity, that was the New York Times, of her work with physicality and text. She's overseen the premieres of two Pulitzer Prize finalists and is currently director of Ntozake Shange's For Color Girls at the Public Theater. Let's take a look at that. For Color Girls. That's at the public right now. And finally, Tamilla Woodard is the Associate Artistic Director of WP Theater. She is slated to direct the world premiere of Donetta Lavinia Gray's Where We Stand. She's currently the Associate Director of Hadestown on Broadway, and let's show a fun little scene from there.
Everybody hungry, everybody tired, everybody slaves for the sweat of his brow. The wage is nothing and the work is hard. It's a graveyard in Hadestown. Way down, Hadestown, way down under the ground.
Right. So, I've had the good fortune to encounter each of your work. Garry, actually, the very first Broadway show I saw when I moved to New York was The Beauty Queen. It's been, I guess, 21 years, and I was poor. I was like mostly just dropping $5 here and there on some black box shows, Uncle Vanya, and that kind of thing. It was great. And suddenly I decided to splurge and on Beauty Queen, and it was incredibly. I just remember I was in the mood for some good, something lavish and dysfunctional and Irish, and I got it all in heavy doses that night. And so thank you for that.
That's all. You're welcome.
Leah, I got to see For Color Girls last night, and it was wonderful. And all of you have to go out and see it. And of course, I saw Hadestown just a few months ago, as we were discussing earlier. But I want to kind of start with a question to you, Garry. I feel like when it comes to cinema, a lot of people have some clear sense of what a director does. I don't really feel that's the same with theater, and I'm wondering if you would agree with that.
Yes, I think the sense of a film director somehow or other, even the credit is a film by. When it comes to theatre, people don't quite understand. First of all, I suppose the responsibility of it, because it's all the decisions you take are yours, and if something goes wrong, in fact, you're responsible. So if you miscast an actor or it doesn't work out with the member of the design team or whatever. So I think it's the responsibility part of it, and then the fact that you, having put this group of people together, you have to create the circumstances in which they can do their best possible work.
Leah, I didn't really know for a long time, but as I understand it, the work of a director in many productions ends as soon as it opens. Is that correct?
Yes. Pretty much, except if you're asked to come back and upkeep the show. So sometimes they'll call you back if the stage manager is struggling with a moment or has questions, then you'll come in and you'll watch it and you'll give the stage manager notes. But I think really in the last 5 years, it feels like the director's work is never done, because you're constantly asked to come to see people who are coming to see the show, or you're asked to do post-show discussions, or you're asked, you have
to glad hand quite a bit more nowadays.
Very much so. Much more, I'd say, within the last 5 years.
So you can't really move on to your next project necessarily.
Well, no, you can, and you do, but you're double dutying. Like you're working 2 jobs, basically. Sometimes 3 jobs, depending.
I'm kind of curious about, with each of the productions, if there's a single sort of big challenge you can identify with each of them to sort of give us a sense of the work. Tamilla, with Hadestown, is there something that you were dealing with that was just, this is a big show. Was there something in particular you can identify as a challenge that you were grappling with for that one?
My job on Hadestown as the associate was really to be a right hand to Rachel and to sort of like try to intuit where where she needed an extra, 2 minutes of thinking or 4 more hands, which I counted my feet in. And she's an incredible leader and also an incredible collaborator. And so one of the things that I think you see when you go to see that show is that there are a lot of minds at work and a lot of the very best sort of creative, collaborative process of people who actually trust that they're going to think this into existence is happening on that stage. And so there is no sense of it can't happen. There's just a sense of oh, is that what we're looking for? Let's go find it. And so really my job was to just help support her vision in that way. And then in this way, because Rachel's moving on to 2 other things at the same time, to maintain the vision with the extraordinary company that we have there,
the connection,
our stage managers and all the other associates.
So in these last several months, has Hadestown, is it constantly getting tweaked?
It was tweaked into absolute refined state, and it's maintaining that refined state, maintaining the tightrope that show exists on. Wow. And that requires everybody every single day and every single moment of that performance to show up. There's no such thing as a second show at Hadestown.
Is there a point at which you feel I'm actually kind of relaxing, we're in a groove, or is it stressful every night?
It's not stressful, but it is it's fine work. That is what it is. And so if you take your mind off of the fine work, you fall off the edge. It's fine work. Mm-hmm. So, and I think, that's the same I saw for Color Girls just a couple of days ago. And I'm that's fine work. That's work that requires every single person in that room to take care of each other and to take care of each of those moments. Or else you're delivering something that's not what everyone agreed on when you opened.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's really the difference, right? Especially with off-Broadway and Broadway. Off-Broadway, the director, go and kind of maintain. But on Broadway, your associate will go and maintain. But ultimately, I'm sure, the idea is you have set very specifically what the rules and the parameters are for the production. And it's a job, and you go in every day, no matter what your job is, you go in and you make certain that those parameters are maintained and the rules are maintained.
Garry, I'm curious, you are, with Richard III, this is a play that's been performed on and off for, 3 or 4 centuries. Mm-hmm. a little bit of a burden, I imagine, carrying that, or do you when you're doing something like Shakespeare, do you just kind of try to shut out all of that historical kind of weight, clearly you've done something that's new, that's never been done, and yet also has been.
Well, the context here would probably be important in the sense that Shakespeare is the national playwright of England. We're just having a bit of difficulty at the moment defining who or what it is. But Shakespeare wasn't really performed much in Ireland. And when it was performed, it was performed as a kind of a colonised version of the plays. So in that context then, actually sort of producing Shakespeare where we use our own voices, where the voices are Irish, and where we don't look for references that are English. That's a different kind of process, and that's part of the process. So in a way, you do have to, when you're doing great plays of any kind, I think you do have to be very careful not to look down, not to see everything all that extraordinary achievement that's, gone before you. And you have to, in a sense, I suppose you have to do these plays like they were new plays. And block out all the rest of the noise.
But to what extent, say, Leah, were you actually going back to the original or the earlier productions, the movie version of For Color Girls?
Never saw it.
Huh?
Never saw it.
Didn't see it, and that was clear from the beginning for you.
Never saw it. Never saw a production of it. Only ever read the 1976 version in college, and then the 2010 version 2 years ago. So I came at it very much like a new play. And then Ntozake gave me the freedom before she passed to kind of manipulate and play and stretch and pull and add poems and turn them into songs. And I mean, she really just gave me free reign in many ways. And so, but with the blessing of the estate.
Mm-hmm.
So I just went to town.
And she passed last year, correct?
She did.
So give me some sense of the conversation that you're having. This is something that's been around for 40, 45 years, correct? Just give us some insight into that conversation you're having, especially since she didn't get to see, what just opened a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. I was telling these two fine people next to me that with the set, when she passed several months before we started designing the set. And so I thought it would be really interesting to find a way to honor her. So we turned the set, the theater that it's in, the Martinson Theater, which is the theater upstairs in the public, which is a very sort of straight theater. We turned it into what feels like an Egyptian ankh. It's a bit of a circular, not necessarily circular, but what's this shape called?
Sort of an oval or an ellipse?
Oval, there it is,
Okay.
Thank you. An oval, and then it has a
I know,
proscenium.
I'm
I feel like
doing
you right here,
trigonometry.
Gary. And so there's a proscenium as much as there is an oval in the shape of an ankh. And I use that because that's a symbol, Egyptian symbol of life and death and rebirth and resurrection. And I thought that would be a really lovely way to kind of bring her into the production. And then I also use her, she was in the original Broadway production. So I use her speaking at the very, very top of the show, where she says, ever since I realized there was someone called a color girl, and I have that looping as these new sort of 2019 color girls are walking in to take position into the show. So there's a lot of that in sort of honoring the elder and honoring Ntozake that I tried very hard to do, recognizing that by keeping her spirit in the room, clearly what happened in 76, at least in my opinion, would be in the room with us. So it's not as if I was taking what was done before, similarly to the situation you're in so much as recognizing that those voices existed and those voices are real, and they too should be featured in this 2019-2020 version.
I think that's a good moment to sort of pivot to that speech that we had earlier, that Rachel Chavkin speaking about this sort of infamous phrase about the pipeline. And Tamilla, I think you posted something on social today saying this is not a pipeline issue. Is this just one of those kinds of eternal cliches you kind of encountered in the industry?
Yeah, it's eternal, and yes, it's eternal. And luckily, I work at WP Theater, formerly Women's Project. Lisa McNulty is the producing artistic director there, and we have a festival called the Pipeline Festival, and it is not. It is
cheeky.
It is exactly cheeky. It's like, if there's a problem with a pipeline, here's the pipeline, And it's like, okay, these people exist. They exist. Even It requires certainly some effort, but it also requires imagination. It also requires that you trust people. I think, as you guys talked about earlier, like you can invest not just time and the resources of your theater, but you should invest your money. You should invest your money in these extraordinary artists, and so that they're not stuck at the level of off-Broadway or off-Broadway, but that they're allowed to rise into a place where they can make a living. And I love this city that I live in, where these many off-Broadway theaters, and we try to pay people very well. However, you have to work your tail off as an off-Broadway director to pay your rent, to live like a human being, to pay for your child's school, to go on like a little week vacation. You have to do a lot. to do that. And so the ceiling is really real. And that ceiling has people who are gatekeepers. And it's just about trusting folks with the money.
Anything to add to that, Gary?
Yeah, I think I would agree. I mean, I was again talking backstage when the Tony nominations came out, and somebody said to me, how would it feel to be the first woman to win a Tony Award for direction? And I literally could not believe it, because I knew the Tony Awards were at least 50 years old. I also, I basically got into the theatre in this city. You know, I went when I was working here as a student in the early 70s. That's where my theatre sensibilities developed. I knew how influential women had been in the American theatre, and I found it very difficult to believe, till I realised, of course, Tony Awards are really only one aspect of the American theatre, because they represent commercial theatre. Mm-hmm. So it's about money. Money is the king in commercial theatre, and in that sense, of course, the men who are investing want people who look like them.
Yeah. So you've worked in different spaces, different countries. The word pipeline, I mean, regardless of the industry, it just seems to me like the perpetual dodge to do the right thing. Does it sound the same wherever you go?
It doesn't quite sound the same. I mean, it certainly did sound the same. I do know that, for instance, up to, say, 15 years ago, the situation in Ireland and the situation in England was somewhat similar. But now, actually, many of the major theatres in the UK are women. I mean, people like Deborah Warner, was the start of it. But now, probably the top, not the top directors leading institutions, but the top directors in the UK are female. And that represents a sea change from what it was when I was starting out.
Leah, do you have a moment that you see as your breakthrough, or who you credit with, getting you through the pipeline, if you will?
Wow, you think I'm through the pipeline? My God.
Outside the pipeline?
Well, let's say let me get to Broadway, and then let's talk again.
See, for me, I don't know. It's maybe I see a show like what I saw last night, and I can understand what you're saying completely. As a spectator, for me, it's a great performance. It was moving and powerful and spoke to the moment. It made me think and feel. And so I think of you as someone who has made it. And I guess to the extent that you get to do these shows which are exciting and which New Yorkers want to go and experience, were there certain moments that you can identify prior to now where you thought, like, that was critical to getting you to the next stage, or certain people?
Okay, that's a great question. That's a different question, I think.
Right, let's go with that question.
Yes. So, again, we were sharing this backstage earlier. I feel like in the last 10 years, I started really truly understanding that my work is very different, in the sense that the kinds of plays that I do, just the shows that I've done in New York, Born Bad, Generations, If Pretty Hurts, For Color Girls, those are 4 that I can think of. There's a British play that I did at Manhattan Theatre Club, a Penny Skinner play. The name escapes me at the moment, but all very similar in the sense that conceptually, I kind of created the concept behind the piece. And so I think that in recognizing that I recognize that's who I am as a director. I think now I can have a conversation with myself as an artist, but I've been chasing for the last 23 years. I've been at this for 23 years. And for the last 23 years, I've been chasing job after job after job after job to pay for ramen noodles. And so it's been an interesting, I'd say maybe the last 10 years, recognizing what you're talking about, where I realize, okay, this is who I am as an artist, and this is how I self-define, and I'm okay with that. So my hope and prayer is that that kind of aesthetic can live beyond the off-Broadway and off-Broadway aesthetic here in New York. And not that I'm requesting that I myself make it to Broadway, but I'm just saying that, as with Rachel, with Hadestown, we begin to think about sort of the muscularity of Broadway in a different way and recognize that there are voices by women that can live in that genre beautifully, healthfully, and financially, and are viable pieces of art that people want to come and see.
Do you have to travel a lot to get the next gig?
Absolutely.
That's going to be hard. You're juggling all kinds of things, I imagine.
All the time. A child, and then my husband is an actor, and he's away a lot. So there's a lot of juggling.
And
We have a village.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Tamilla?
Oh God, I'm like, I'm laughing just because it's ridiculous. Like I just, I came from New Haven today. I'll go to Boston at the end of the week. I've spent several weeks in San Francisco. Yes, I think we were talking about the fact that like we are made to be multitaskers, and not only do you have to multitask, you have to like it has to be a home run every single time. And so I have a very nice husband. He's at home, listening. It is you go where the conversation is, you go where the work is, you stay where they love you.
Do you encounter, I guess, people who are trying to hold on to their piece of the pie? Is that a sort of a face-to-face kind of thing that happens? The people who are trying to essentially not cede terrain. Is this something that you encounter, Garry, even at your point in?
No, because I think that attributes kind of human failings to only one sex. I mean, we're all, people who get somewhere tend to, want to protect their space and so on and so forth. But given that sort of men have had the running in it, then, there is an obligation always to, and for women, there's an obligation to reach down and help somebody else up the ladder. And, the theatre is very competitive. I mean, it's not about art. I think men, too, are considerably better at managing their careers and at putting down markers and at sort of that whole process, I think, comes easier to them than it does to women. I think that would have been part of the process. Certainly I know for me, I mean, because I'm in a different situation than my two colleagues. I mean, the fact that I've been running a theatre company all of my life, I'm absolutely certain that I would not be in the theatre today had I to go out and look for jobs. I wouldn't have been able for it. I might be able for it now at the age I am, but I wouldn't have had that kind of confidence. I wouldn't have been able to make the kind of compromises and so on. I just wouldn't have been able to do it. And I've been very lucky and been very fortunate that I've been able to be in a position to somehow or other shape something of what I do. Although, of course, obviously you're constantly having to make compromises with money, finance, and so on and so forth. But, more women leaders of more theatres. I think that's probably the single most important thing that needs to happen.
Agreed. Yep. Absolutely.
Were there particular shows that you saw at a certain age that made you realize that you wanted to do what you do? Tamilla, you want to go with that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I remember seeing Mary Zimmerman's Metamorphoses I don't remember what year it was, and just going like, that was, this is the thing about both of these women here, and the women that I really admire, is that the work is lush. It is inventive. It is like staggeringly dimensional. There's rain, Gary, in your play.
Well, there's rain all the time in my life. That's why.
You know, and it's just like, it is just so full of an invitation to the audience to lean forward and imagine. And so, and I find that is something that is like, that is what I think of when I'm sitting in a theater, in a place been directed by a director who is a woman, is that there's a kind of lush invitation to your imagination. And I remember sitting in Metamorphosis and going, there's a pool on stage, but that could just be a thing. No, they did an entire like acrobatic, beautiful love story in a pool that was about yearning, and it was about humanity, and it was about forgiveness. And that there's some excavation of what it means to be human inside of the work that I think that we're doing particularly, or about the current world and the leadership that we have right now, that just turns me on and makes me really happy to be an artist, but really happy to be an artist that's female.
Leah?
I would say when I was a child, my mother brought me up to New York. I'm from Philadelphia originally, and she brought me up to see Sarafina, the musical. And we sat in the balcony on the first row. She was so excited that she could get those tickets. And I remember watching that production and thinking, I can do this. Like this is exactly what I love about me.
Was this consistent with something that was already happening in your life, or was it a complete just...
The poetry of the language in that musical was just stunning. And I was a poet and still am a poet. And the music and the musical sort of the relationship that music had to movement, and the passion and compassion for the political situation that that they were telling on stage, all of that, I think, just spoke to me and made me feel compelled to find a way into the theater. And, I guess, I don't know how many years later I did, and here I am now.
2 or 3?
Yeah. Yes, you're very kind.
How about you, Gary?
Well, I'd actually say probably it was a theatre I saw in this city in the early 70s. Joe Chaikin, Meredith Monk, theatre made by people who looked like me, i.e. looked the same age as me, and was made in rooms, in small rooms. And that was really, it was the combination of that and a sense that, I could maybe try and, with people who I was making theatre in university with, go and try and recreate that in the town I came from in Galway. And that's how it came about. There's no doubt at all, just to say, if I had wanted to direct, for me to try and access the professional theatre in Ireland would have, since it exclusively existed only then in Dublin, there's no way I would have had any access to it, or would have dreamed of having any access to it. So,
anyone in the audience have any questions now for our esteemed directors? We'll ask you to go to the mic if you could. Why don't you go ahead and move up there if you don't mind. What's your name?
My name's Raphael.
Hi.
Hi.
Go ahead, throw your question.
Sounds a little low. I'm an actor, and I've worked in a lot of different, regional theaters around the country. And one thing that I was thinking about as you guys were discussing is, especially in terms of how do you move forward and how do you get through this pipeline. And one thing that I encounter a lot in these rooms when you're working is this idea of, oh, well, that these are the people what we're performing for. And I'm in twofold. I think it's a cop-out, but I also wonder your takes on how you address that of the traditional theater audience. And I think sometimes it's used as an excuse of why, people aren't trusted and given this shot because they're like, well, this is our subscriber base, so we have to satisfy the subscribers. So it's kind of twofold of like, I feel like that is a cop-out, but also is true. And how do you, in two ways, one, like direct without having that idea affect your vision, while also addressing who's going to be in the room, you know, that's watching these shows and how they're going to receive it, especially when it comes towards like telling a black show for an audience you know it's going to be mostly white.
Well, I'll start actually because this came up with my cast. Oh wait, where are you going? Come back so I can talk to you. Thank you. This came up with my cast where we had a couple of previews, and the cast, they were sort of saying, it's just, you know, how are we going to access this? This is just, whew. And then I jokingly said, listen, you know, we're extended 3 times. We've got 4 weeks. Let's get past the subscribers and let's move on. And we're playing like we're playing it for those people who will be in the room when we know we need them to be in the room. And I think that, you know, it's not to discount the subscribers, but it's also, it was more about giving the freedom to my cast to recognize that they are playing for themselves. And that ultimately who receives their play, it's like, and you're in a sandbox and you've got your bucket and you've got your shovel, whoever comes over to play, great. But if they're not willing to play, there's not a lot you can do. And that is my philosophy. I really do believe that ultimately the plays that we make, we want the audience to be able to appreciate and access and feel and experience. But as artists, and particularly artists of color, we have to make the art that feels most organic to us. And I guarantee if it feels that to you, it will feel that to everyone in the room.
I would also say that in thinking about like artistic leadership too, that one of the jobs of leadership is to make sure that the artist whom you've invited to create work at your theater, that they have an audience that can respond to that work. And that's hard work to do. That's really, really hard work to do. And it doesn't mean that that audience is exclusive, but I think that you do your audience a service to make sure that there are different kinds of people represented that help lead you forward into leaning into the story, that help you feel invited into the story also. And it's super hard work. And we're like, I mean, I think every theater here in town is trying to figure it out, you know, and certainly WP is trying to figure it out. How do you support the artists that are on the stage with making sure that the audience also represents some of the people for whom the story was made?
And I think it's really different in New York.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there are so many initiatives, right, that a lot of the major off-Broadway theater companies are doing, and Broadway producers are doing, hence with Slave Play, right? But I think that when you go out into the regions, like you're saying, it's a very different story. And I know they're working very hard also now with DEI work. Everyone's really working diligently in the American theater to try to make these audiences much more diverse. So I don't know how it's happening in the UK, but I know that's what we're doing.
Well,
here.
in Ireland, Ireland's diversity in Irish society is only like about a generation, you know, old, but it's been sudden, and obviously there is a big game of catch up, I think, particularly since the Irish canon is almost uniquely, you know, we were a homogeneously white society up until a generation ago, and so it's a very tricky thing. But again, as you say, theatres are working very, very hard to diversify their audiences and also to send the average age of the audience down. I mean, the grain of the audience is the huge challenge in Ireland at the moment.
Is that identified as it often is here with, oh, it's really expensive? Is it?
No.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. It's kind of probably, it's like, say, with something like Druid, it was founded in 1975, and the people who came to see it were people around our own age, and therefore those people are there now watching the shows with grey hair and so on and so forth. So it's not really. But in Ireland as well, audiences are definitely, there's most audiences would be about 60% female. And 40% male. And it's the women who tend to bring the men to the theatre, not the other way around.
75% female here.
Yeah.
We have two mics on either side, so if you could go ahead, yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Melissa Bell, and I wondered how you pick the plays that you direct, either yourself or artistic director, and what do you look for in those plays, or how do you feel when you decide you want to do one?
Melissa, are you in theater yourself? I'm just curious.
Yes, I'm a playwright.
Curious, great question.
How you pick the plays? Well, in terms of new plays, we would have a program of developing new work, and in fact, Druid this year produced only new work, apart from Richard, which had been produced the previous year. So we did all new plays. Obviously, in that sense, it's the play. It's the play you read that you connect with, and that you make sense to do. In regard to other work, I think a lot of it would be, for me, would be about the combination of the play itself, the actors that I want to work with, what our audiences might want to hear or engage with. You're constantly trying, I think, to do something that is something that you feel you will be able to do, but it's not something that you did before, because if it's that, then it has no purpose, it has no energy. So it's a constant debate and discussion with yourself, with your colleagues in the theatre, with the actors, with the wider profession, and so on. So choices of repertoire usually for me come at the end of a very long series of discussions.
I bet we have a lot of the same things. There are a couple of things that happen. One is you sort of come up in generations of artists, and so there are people that you love and admire that you've never worked with. There are people that you love and admire that you always work with. There are people who you're eager to find some space, some time with, and I think, and in addition, you're trying to exploit opportunity. And different theaters have different kind of identities, and what's right for ACT is not necessarily right for WP. So you're trying to find the place where you want to go, where you're loved, right? And find the play that will be a success for them, a challenge and a success, and exploit the time where we are in our own sort of history, the artists that are available, and what an audience is kind of up for. And you sort of guess at what the audience is up for. For our programming, we're looking at a lot of different people all the time, and we have a fat pipeline of artists that are coming through, and we want to give everybody some sort of we want to give really deserving artists an opportunity.
So my situation is a little different. Because I'm a freelance director, so I don't have one institution with which I work. I tend to, I'm at this stage of my career usually called a lot of the times by artistic directors, or playwrights agents will contact my agent and say, we're interested in this play for you. There are some writers who contact me directly, and I read every play that is sent to me. And if the play speaks to me and I'm excited by it, then I will contact the theaters that I have a great relationship with, that I love, that I think this play may be great for. And I take a meeting and share the play. And then I a lot of times will, if I have an idea, a play that I'm interested in, especially a classic or a musical, when I take meetings with artistic directors, I will share with them the various plays and or classics that I'm interested in and how I'm interested in doing them and the actors I want to work with and how it would look. I'm very visual, so I talk a lot in sort of images and story that way and dramaturgy. But that's really my path to bring plays.
Thank you.
Anyone else with a question?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Emily. I'm wondering, as a young woman who's about to graduate college and is looking to find a space for myself in the creative professional world, to each of you, what do you think is the characteristic within yourself that was the most essential to your success so far?
That's a great question.
Persistence.
I was about to say perseverance.
Be relentless.
Wait, you guys just used the same word in 3 different synonyms, basically.
And they're 3 big male words.
They were persistent with their sentiments, so I appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you, and thank you to Garry Hynes, Tamilla Woodard, and Leah C. Gardiner for your time and for your art. Thank you so much.